This video is for practice test 8, the calculator portion. There are 38 questions. Number 1 is just a way to represent slope. C pounds of grapes, and they're $2 each, so 2 times C. The answer is A. Number 2, they asked about the interval that the number of figurines decreased the fastest, so we're looking at the steepest slope going down. So I see there's a couple slopes that go down here, those two. So between 1 and 2 shows up, and between 3 and 4 shows up. The others are definitely wrong because it's not going down. And C, between 3 and 4, is a steeper downward slope. 3 we can set up as a proportion. 3 defects out of 200 cars equals how many defects out of 10,000 cars? Variety of ways on how you can solve this, but let's say we cross multiply. So we have 30,000 is equal to 200x. Our answer is going to be 150. A. 4 is about a line of best fit for this scatter plot. So they gave us an equation as well as a graph. And they're looking for, if our input is 19 millimeters, what is our predicted output going to be? Since this is the calculator portion, I would just plug in 19 for x and solve it this way. This gives you exactly 52.83. Number 5, we know that these lines are parallel, and since y is 20, this one up here is also 20. And since z is 60, we can take 180 minus 60 minus 20 to figure out our answer, 100. Number 6 is a word problem. We have to translate into a system of equations. Don't have to solve it, just figure out the equation. So bench tickets here, 75, and lawn, 40. So we can write that as 75b plus 40l. And really that rules out this one for sure, and this one also because you don't have to multiply. And we're down to C or D. The difference is the right side of the equation. Should they be like they are here in C, or should they be flipped like they are in D? And it turns out that 350 is the total number of tickets sold, and this is the amount raised. So the amount raised should go with the 75 and the 40. And the total number of tickets would just be B plus L is equal to 350. And that's why D is the best answer. Number 7, remember that y equals mx plus b, and m here is the slope. So we have a slope of 1/3, we have a slope of 1, we have a slope of 3, we have a slope of 6. Slope of 3. C. Number 8 is actually not that difficult of a problem, but it has a very confusing trick. So if most of you approach this and try to just plug in numbers, you would probably say something like 2 plus 1 is equal to 2 over 2 plus 1, because we're going to try to plug in 2 here and see what answers we can get. And you might say that 3 is equal to 2/3, and that doesn't work, and keep trying. However, the issue is we're looking for a possible value of x plus 1. So what we're replacing is actually this entire expression, which is why B is the best answer, because if you plug in root 2 for x plus 1, it becomes true. For number 9, if we want to solve for k, they tell us that the volume is 473, which is equal to this equation. So we start with 473 is equal to 7 pi k cubed over 48. So if we move things around a little bit, we can put the 48 on the left here, and the 7 pi on the bottom. And this tells us what k cubed is equal to. So we're looking for the cube root of 48 times 473 divided by 7 pi. So using our calculator a little bit, we can get to this value and take the cube root, and we get 10.1, which is D. Number 10 is tricky because this constant rate idea would make you think that's a straight line. Linear equations have a constant rate after all, so it would be tempting to pick A, but if you look at the actual shape again, because it's narrower at the bottom, at the start it's going to fill up a little bit faster. And then as the diameter of the cup gets larger, it's going to fill up a little bit slower. So C actually matches with that pattern. So for 11, 128 fluid ounces, and the maximum volume is 16 fluid ounces. So 128 divided by 16, this gives us 8. B. Number 12, a system of inequalities, and there's this not meet his goal part that throws things off. Because as written, his goal was to sell at least 57 insurance policies, so it would make sense to write x plus y is greater than or equal to 57 for his goal. But since he didn't meet his goal, we know that x plus y is actually less than 57. If you tried to find that top one, you'd get the wrong answer. So we can cross off B and D, actually. And then the only difference is less than 3 million or greater than 3 million. And they tell us right here, over 3 million. So that's why C is the best answer. For 13, we have to remember how negative exponents work, that this is just going to become a over 1/2. We also have to remember how fraction exponents work, that this becomes 1 over the square root of a. And at this point, we want to get a in terms of x, so we want to solve for a, get a all by itself. So let's square both sides, and we can multiply fractions straight across, so we get 1 over a is equal to x squared. So if we want to move a to the top, we can just take the reciprocal of both sides. That'd be the same thing as doing, in a couple steps, multiply by a, then divide by x squared. But essentially we end up with a is equal to 1 over x squared, which is going to be c. For 14, this expression is undefined when the bottom is equal to 0. If we factor this, we get x plus 5 times x minus 2. 5 times negative 2 equals this. 5 plus negative 2 equals that. So there's two possible values here, if x is equal to negative 5 or if x is equal to positive 2. D is the only one that shows up. 15, if density is mass over volume, we can plug in for density and we can plug in for volume. After all, they give us this formula here. So we can replace this with 60,000. And if we multiply both sides by 60,000, we get 168,000 is equal to our mass, D. 16, a probability question involving this table. The last sentence has the real question. Out of all of those who received a sugar pill, which is 150 in total, that's our denominator, how many of them reported contracting a cold? And that's 33. That goes on top. So we don't see 33 over 150 here, but if we divided the top and the bottom by 3, we'd get 11 over 50. B. If I was solving 17, I would enter these values into a list in a TI-83 calculator, 84, whatever you got, and I would use the one variable statistics function. This would tell me right off the bat my x bar and my median. That's what it tells you in the calculator, x bar, which is the same thing as mean, or MED, which is median. And the highest frequency is my mode, so that's how I know that 18 is my mode, and that tells me the answer. If you didn't have that approach, or didn't know how to do that approach, you could look that these larger values have a very small frequency, so they are going to pull the average up. So you know that the mean is going to be the highest. And since the most frequently occurring is the smallest age, it's probable that the mode is going to be the smallest also. That's why A is the correct answer. For 18, we're looking at a particular forest that has a mean annual temperature of -2 degrees Celsius. So if we're looking at, here's -2.5, -2 might be somewhere around here, and bring that up. And what is it closest to? 70%, because if you follow that over to the left. This problem somewhat breaks the pattern that there's a 3 here at the end, and you might be tempted to go up from 3. But if you read carefully, you can figure out which is the input and which is the output. And years is nowhere on the x or y axis. So we're actually going to be inputting degrees to get a value of leaf litter mass remaining. And C, 70%, is closest to right here at -2. 19 gives us a couple pieces of information about this graph. They tell us the zeros are -3 and 1. So that means we should be crossing here at -3 and here at 1. And they tell us that the range is less than or equal to 4. So if this is 4 here, then it's going to look something like this. And we can rule out C and D because they look nothing like that. And the mistake with one of these is that the zeros here are at -1 and 3, which are backwards. So that's why A is the best choice. Number 20, to find the actual savings per year, you're going to have to take the average annual energy, the original, and the new, and subtract the two. So A or B both have this function. Subtracting the original from the cost of the installation or dividing these two doesn't make any sense. So the question becomes then, this annual savings multiplied by T, the number of years, are we trying to figure out when it's greater or less than 25,000? And the answer is greater, because that's when the savings is more than the amount you spent on the heating system. In 21, when they ask about 3.39, that's the slope of this line of best fit, which is a linear equation. So what it's saying is that's how much the production of plastic is increasing for every year X since 1985. So the average annual increase is what we're looking for, D. 22, from 2000 to 2003. So you could try to look at the graph here and figure that out, but I think it's probably better just to use the equation. So if I plug 15 and 18 into this line of best fit, these are the two numbers I get. So then I can take 108, let's say, divided by 98. This gives me 1.10, which means I had a 10% increase. A. So for 23, this exponential equation for members of a gym, it starts off for every year. And then for every year, if we want to translate this into quarters, we have to remember that there's 4 quarters per year. So there's 4 times as many. So we'd have to take 4 times the number of years to get the number of quarters. If we want to set this equal to T, we'd have to divide both sides by 4, and we'd get that T is equal to Q over 4. That's why A is our best choice. For 24, they only give us some tiny pieces of information, and this is about contestant 2. They got 70% of the social media vote and 40% of the text messages. So D is the right answer. If you were someone voting by social media, you were more likely to prefer contestant 2 than if you're voting by text message, because those percentages are there and conclusive and true. Number A, the number of viewers that voted doesn't change the percentages, so we can't extrapolate that. We don't know. Based on this pattern, it's not true. And we don't know anything about the age of viewers, and just because a viewer voted by a different medium doesn't mean they would change their mind. So that's why C doesn't make sense either. D. So here's a table of population. We're told the relationship is linear. So it goes down over 10 years. It goes down by 16. And this is over 10 years. So we take -16 and we divide it by 10, and we get -1.6. So there's a 16. That's wrong. There's a positive 16. Those are both wrong. So we're down to A or D. Given that the definition of T is the number of years after 2000, we don't need to add this extra expression here in D. That's why A is the best choice. 26, we surveyed 20 families at a playground, and for those families, the mean number of children per household was 2.4. Does that mean conclusively that the mean for the whole community is 2.4? No. I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that households at a playground are going to have more kids than other households. And B is not necessarily true, though it is a small sample size. It's just not representative of the community at large. But I'm going to go with C. It's flawed and may produce a biased estimate. Lots of families with kids move near elementary schools or visit playgrounds. That doesn't really speak to the rest of the community. For 27, we can plug in P for X and R for Y, and then 2P for X and 5R for Y to get these two equations. And I'm going to take 2 times 2P and just rewrite that as 4P. And since b is a constant and we want to get rid of it to figure out the other ones, I'm going to multiply this entire top equation by -1. So this becomes -r is equal to -p minus b. Now I'll cross that out. I'm going to use elimination to add these straight down. So this gives me that 4r is equal to 3p. So the b's cancel out. Now I want r over p, so I'm going to divide by p on both sides, and then I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides. And I end up with r over p is equal to 3 over 4, which is b. 28 is about pulse rates in beats per minute before and after completing an exercise routine. And we're specifically looking at standard deviation and range. Remember that standard deviation is the variance, how far apart results are from an average, where range is the maximum minus the minimum. So let's start with the range. 88 minus 56 gives us a range of 32 for this top one. If I take 112 minus 80, I get a range of 32 for the bottom as well. So I could rule out B and C at this point, and basically I want to know, are the standard deviations equal or not? And just by looking at the plots, here it's evenly spread out, some dots all across. There's a lot of dots in the middle here. The standard deviation is going to be smaller before exercise, which kind of makes sense, I guess, because some people will have different reactions to exercise based on how fit they are. So D is our best choice. 5,000 sheets of paper, used up 30% of that. So 30% of 5,000 is 1,500. So 1,500 per 20 minutes. So we start off with 5,000, and if we take 1,500 divided by 20, we are subtracting 75 pages per minute. B is the best choice. This is a linear relationship. You don't need C or D's exponentials. Number 30, f of x looks like this. Y is equal to f of x. Notice this is function notation, and that just means what you put into the function. And the maximum value is k. So the largest value you get out is a 3. So that's what we're going to put into g of k. We're going to put in, g of x. We're going to put in a 3 for k. So in other words, the x value is going to be 3. And what do we get as a result? B, 6. So there are 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of oxygen, and 1 molecule. So multiply that by 51. How many atoms of hydrogen? 2 times 51 is equal to 102. Number 32, a couple different ways to solve this. Let's say that we added 1/2 a to both sides. And let's say we multiplied by 2. We're also told that x is 1. The answer is 2. For 33, these two equations represent the same line for some constant c. If you look at the coefficients of the x and the y values, if we just took this top equation and multiplied the entire thing by 3, we would get 3x plus 6y is equal to 30. So if these two things are the same, c is going to have to be 30. 11 miles in 26 minutes multiplied by 60 minutes per 1 hour will give you the miles per hour. We want this to the nearest tenth, and we get 25.4. 35, we're looking at f of x here, and then they give us a hypothetical, here's g of x, when will they cross? So we have to pay close attention to the scale here. The y-axis is counting up by ones each time, and the x-axis is counting up by halves. So if we start here at 10 for g of x, and we go down 1, really, we're going to be heading over here because of the scale. So where they meet is at 2, 8. And they want to know what is the a value or the x value. So it's 2. If you had kept going, you could have figured out the other possible answer was 8. One of these two. For 36, let's pick a random point W on line RT, and what do we know? We know that angle RSW plus angle WST is equal to 90, so they are complementary angles. And there's this property where if you take the cosine of an angle, let's say 20 degrees, it's going to be equal to the sine of its complement, let's say 70. Or vice versa, if we said cosine of 70, that's going to be equal to sine of 20. And this works for any two angles that add up to 90. and these two angles add up to 90. So everything here is going to be equal to whatever this is. If you subtract something that's equal to itself, you get 0. Your final answer, 0. So for 37, we had to refer back to the table and graph previously. But notice for 5 minutes and 10 minutes, there are some different concentrations. The concentration at 5 minutes is 152, and at 10 minutes is 118. So if these are the concentrations, we can multiply them by the number of milliliters. So at 5 minutes, we had 10 milliliters, and at 10 minutes, we had 8 milliliters. So we get these amounts of micrograms of penicillin. And if you subtract the two, you get a difference of 576, which is your final answer. For 38, the last one, we have this formula, and we're asked to figure out what b is, rounded to the nearest tenth. So I'm noticing they're using t over 5, and we have a t of 5, so I'm going to use this coordinate 5, 152 kind of as a test case. Because if I put a 5 in the exponent, 5 divided by 5 gives me 1. So I have 152 is equal to 200 times b. And if I divide both sides by 200, I get 0.76 is equal to b. But they want me to round this to the nearest tenth. So 0.8 is the final answer.